I hadn't planned to stay at the cabin long, maybe 2 or 3 days tops. Just enough time to clear my head, get some space from the noise of everyday life. It wasn't even my cabin. It belonged to an old coworker named Ben. I barely knew him outside of work, but when I mentioned I needed a break, he offered it up like it was nothing, said it was quiet, remote. No Wi-Fi, he added, like that was a selling point. At the time, it sounded perfect. No texts, no emails, no people. Just me and the woods. I packed light, a couple of changes of clothes, some food, a book I'd been meaning to finish. The drive was longer than I thought it would be, nearly 4 hours of winding back roads and forest-lined highways. By the time I turned off the main road, the sun was already starting to drop behind the trees. The gravel road leading to the cabin was rough and narrow. Trees crowded the edges, their bare branches arching overhead. The deeper I drove, the darker it got. No other houses, no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the trees. It felt like the kind of place where you could disappear and no one would notice for days. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, it was smaller than I expected. One story, dark wood with a sagging porch and a single light above the door. There was a woodshed off to the side, half collapsed under its own weight. The whole place looked tired, like it had been sitting here for decades, slowly sinking into the earth. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, just listening. The wind moved through the trees, branches creaking and cracking. There was no other sound. No birds, no insects, just the wind. I grabbed my bag and headed up the steps. The porch creaked under my weight. The key was right where Ben said it would be, under a loose rock by the door. It turned in the lock with a loud, rusty click. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood smoke and old blankets. There was a small living room with a couch and a coffee table, a tiny kitchen off to the left, and a narrow hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. Everything was dark wood, faded and worn. It wasn't cozy. It was functional. I dropped my bag on the couch and flicked on the lights. They buzzed faintly, casting a dim yellow glow. I stood there for a minute, just taking it in. I wanted to feel calm. I wanted to feel relaxed. But something about the place felt still, like it had been sitting here empty for too long. I told myself it was nothing, just my brain adjusting to the quiet. I spent the first couple of hours unpacking and making dinner. Just something simple, canned soup on the stovetop. I ate on the couch, scrolling through old pictures on my phone even though I told myself I'd disconnect. Couldn't help it. The light outside faded fast. By 8 p.m. it was pitch black. I stepped outside to bring in some wood for the stove and realized how dark it really was. No moon, no stars, just the trees pressing in from all sides. I stood on the porch for a minute, listening. Nothing. No wind. No animals. Just silence. I stacked the wood by the stove and built a fire. The crackling filled the room with soft, uneven noise. It made the place feel a little more alive. I sat on the couch, stared at the flames, and told myself to relax. Then I heard it, a soft thump. I sat up, listening. It was faint. Could have been a branch falling outside. I waited. Another thump. This time it sounded closer. Heavy. Deliberate. I stood, heart pounding. I walked to the window and looked out, but all I saw was my own reflection staring back. I turned off the light, then checked again. The porch was empty. The trees stood still. I told myself it was nothing, just the woods, just my imagination. I locked the door anyway. The morning came gray and cold. I slept poorly, waking up every hour to check the window. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, there was frost on the porch railing. My breath hung in the air. I went outside to clear my head, walking the edge of the property. The ground was soft from the rain a few days before, and as I circled the cabin, I noticed something strange. Footprints. They weren't mine. Bare feet, deep enough to be recent. They circled the cabin in an uneven loop, like someone had been walking around it all night. I crouched down, staring at them. The mud at the edges was still wet. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an animal, but I knew better. I kept the fire burning that night, more for the light than the heat. I locked all the doors and windows. I I even propped a chair under the front doorknob the way you see in movies. I knew it was stupid, but it made me feel a little better. I sat on the couch with my book, trying to focus, but I kept listening. Every creak, every pop of the wood stove made my heart jump. I told myself I was overreacting. Then the footsteps started again. Slow, heavy, circling the cabin. I froze, gripping the book so hard my hands hurt. My breath felt loud in my ears. The footsteps stopped at the porch. I stood, grabbing the flashlight. I didn't want to check, but I couldn't help it. I walked slowly to the window, peeking out through the edge of the curtain. Nothing. The porch was empty. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't staying another night. I packed my bag in record time, throwing everything in without folding it. I wanted to be gone before the sun started to set again. As I carried my bag to the car, I noticed something near the edge of the woods. A pile of wood stacked neatly. I hadn't done that. It wasn't there yesterday. My hands started to shake. I threw my bag in the car and got in, slamming the door. As I turned the key, I glanced back at the cabin one last time, and I saw it. A figure standing at the tree line, not moving, not waving, just watching. I didn't stay to get a better look. I drove fast, faster than I should have on those winding roads. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. I never told Ben what happened. I never went back. Sometimes I wonder who or what was out there, but most of the time I just try to forget. I drove through the winding forest road with nothing but the crunch of gravel under my tires and the fading sun hanging low in the sky. The air outside was thick with the smell of damp pine and earth, but inside my car, it was quiet. Too quiet. I'd killed the radio an hour ago, and now the silence had settled in my chest like a heavy weight. My fingers gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. I wasn't scared. Not yet. Just uneasy. I had never been to the cabin before. My friend Tom swore by it, said it was the perfect place to disconnect. I didn't really need to disconnect, but I needed space. The kind of space where no one would bother me. No phones, no emails. Just me and the trees. That was the plan anyway. The cabin was deeper in the woods than I expected. The kind of place where you start second-guessing the directions halfway through the drive. No lights, no houses. Just the road getting narrower until it felt more like a trail. The trees pressed in close on either side, branches overhead, turning the light into this dull, hazy gray. I hadn't seen another car in at least 30 minutes. When I finally found it, the sun was just dipping below the treetops. The cabin sat in a small clearing, one story, dark wood, slouched like it had been here for decades. The porch sagged slightly on one side, and the windows were so dark they might as well have been painted black. There was a woodpile stacked neatly by the side, though, and the front door had a heavy padlock hanging loose. Tom said he left it open for me. I parked, grabbed my bag from the back seat, and headed up the steps. They creaked under my weight, loud, sharp sounds that echoed longer than they should have. The door swung open with a low groan. Inside, it smelled like dust and old wood, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes. The cabin was simple. One main room with a couch and a kitchen off to the side. A single bedroom in the back. No TV, no Wi-Fi. Just a wood stove, a couple of lamps, and a radio with a crackly speaker. It felt colder inside than it did outside. I dropped my bag on the couch and stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. Just the wind in the trees and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I should have felt calm. I wanted to feel calm, but something felt off. The first few hours passed slowly. I made a fire, threw some leftover spaghetti I'd packed into a pot, and sat at the little kitchen table while the room warmed up. I tried to read a book, but I kept glancing at the windows. They were so dark it felt like something was on the other side, watching. Just empty woods, I told myself. Nothing out there, but my stomach felt tight. Around 10 p.m., I killed the lights and headed to the bedroom. The mattress was old and lumpy, and the blankets smelled faintly of mildew. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I could hear the trees creaking outside, the wind moving through the branches. Normal sounds, harmless. Then something thumped, just once, dull and heavy. From outside, I sat up, heart pounding. My brain scrambled for explanations. Branch falling, animal hitting the porch, something. But I didn't move. I just sat there, holding my breath, waiting. Another thump, this time closer. I got out of bed, grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand. My hands were sweaty on the handle. I crept to the front window and tilted the beam outside. Nothing, just trees and shadows. The woodpile sitting where it always had. The car parked where I left it. I exhaled, long and slow, and felt stupid for being so jumpy. But as I turned to head back to bed, something caught my eye, something small. The woodpile. One of the logs was lying on the ground. I remembered it being stacked neatly when I arrived. I stared at it for a long time. The morning came cold and gray. I made coffee, trying to shake off the weird feeling from the night before. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the woods messing with me. Little noises always feel bigger when you're alone. I walked around the cabin a bit after breakfast, checking the property. The log was still on the ground where I'd seen it. I stacked it back on the pile and kept walking. The dirt around the cabin was soft from the rain a few days earlier. As I walked, I noticed something. Tracks. Not animal tracks. Footprints. Bare feet. They circled the cabin, uneven and shallow, like someone had been pacing. My mouth went dry. I crouched down, staring at them. They were fresh. The edges hadn't softened from the wind yet. I followed them a little further, but they just looped back toward the porch. I should have left then. I wanted to, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone from a nearby cabin passing through. Harmless. I didn't want to admit how nervous I felt. I locked the doors that night, all of them, even propped a chair under the front doorknob. I told myself it was just to feel better, not because I thought I needed to, but when the sun went down, the tension crept back in. I sat on the couch for hours, just listening. The fire crackled softly, the wood stove ticking as it cooled. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, and then footsteps, slow, deliberate. My chest tightened. They circled the cabin again, just like the tracks I'd seen. I grabbed the flashlight and stood by the window, barely breathing. I didn't want to turn it on. I didn't want to see. They stopped near the porch. I waited. The silence stretched on so long it felt unbearable. Then something scratched the door. Light, almost gentle, like fingers. I don't remember moving. I just remember grabbing my keys and running. The chair under the door crashed to the floor as I threw it open and sprinted to my car. My hands shook so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The headlights flicked on. Nothing. I peeled out of there, gravel spraying the trees, heart hammering so hard it hurt. I didn't stop driving until I hit the highway. I never went back for my stuff. I never asked Tom about it. Some things you just don't need answers for. I should have known better, not because there were any signs, but because I let my own stubbornness talk me into this mess. I wanted space, that's all. Some room to breathe. A weekend away from the constant noise of the city, the same faces at work, the same 4 walls of my apartment. A couple of days in the woods sounded perfect. No texts, no emails, just quiet. The cabin was nothing special. I rented it off some basic listing online. The pictures showed a small, weathered wooden shack surrounded by thick pines. Nothing cute or cozy about it. It was practical, 4 walls, a roof, a bed, and a little kitchen. That's all I wanted. Something simple. I packed light, just a backpack with some clothes, a couple of paperbacks, my phone, a flashlight, some food. I figured I'd hike, read, maybe build a fire if I felt like it. The drive up took longer than I thought. About 4 hours into the mountains, and I didn't see another car for the last 50 miles. The road was more like a dirt path in some spots, kicking up dust and gravel against the undercarriage of my car. It was rough enough that I almost turned back, but I told myself to keep going. I had come too far to quit. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, the sun was low in the sky, drenching the woods in this dim, orange light. It looked still, too still. The trees weren't moving, there weren't any sounds. No birds, no rustling leaves. Just the faint hum of my engine cooling down when I shut it off. I got out and stretched my legs, feeling the quiet press down on me. The cabin was exactly like the pictures. Weathered wood, a single window in the front, door slightly warped from time. I fumbled with the key for a minute before the lock clicked. Inside was, well, nothing special. A narrow bed with a thin mattress, a small wooden table, 2 chairs. A tiny kitchen with an old fridge that rattled when I plugged it in. No TV, no radio, just the basics. I put my stuff down, drank some water, and sat on the edge of the bed for a minute. I remember thinking it was too quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. I figured maybe I was just being paranoid. I'd lived in the city for so long I wasn't used to real silence. I decided to walk a bit before it got dark. There was a trail behind the cabin that led deeper into the woods. I followed it for a while, just listening to the crunch of my boots on the dirt. The trees were tall and packed tight. I kept going until I realized I hadn't heard a single bird or animal the entire time. It wasn't normal. I grew up around woods. There's always something moving, always something making noise. Not here. I turned back before it got too dark. When I got to the cabin, I made something simple to eat and sat at the little table by the window. I kept looking outside while I ate. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I was expecting to see something, but there was nothing there, just trees fading into shadows. That night, I didn't sleep well. The mattress was thin, and every time I moved, the springs creaked under me. I must have woken up 10 times, always with that feeling like something wasn't right. At one point, I got up to use the bathroom, and when I came back, I glanced out the window. It was pitch black. No moon, no stars. But I swear I saw something, just the faintest hint of movement between the trees. A dark shape there for a second, then gone. I stood there for a long time, staring into the dark. Nothing moved. I told myself I was tired, that I was imagining it. The next day, I went for another hike, this time farther down the trail. The woods were still dead quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, but it was always just trees. About an hour in, I found something strange. A small clearing with a pile of wood stacked neatly in the center. Freshly cut logs. Too fresh. There was no moss, no dirt on them. It didn't make sense. No cabins nearby, no signs of people. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out why it felt so wrong. Then I noticed the footprints. They were in the dirt around the logs. Barefoot. Deep impressions, bigger than my own feet. It looked like someone had been standing there for a long time. I knelt down and touched one of the prints. The edges were sharp, not weathered. Fresh. I felt this cold knot twist in my stomach. I stood up and left. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was starting to set again. I locked the door and shut all the windows. I sat at the table, staring out the window, feeling my heart beat a little too hard. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Maybe a hiker. Maybe I was overreacting. But that night, I heard something. It started around 2 a.m., slow, deliberate footsteps outside the cabin. Heavy. Not an animal. Someone walking in circles. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The footsteps kept going, slow and steady, crunching the dirt and leaves. They circled the cabin once, then twice, then stopped. I waited. I didn't move. My hands were shaking. I stared at the door, expecting it to open, but nothing happened. After a few minutes, I crept over to the window and peeked out. The moon was out now, casting enough light to see the trees, but there was nothing there. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, a kitchen knife in my hand. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I packed my stuff. I didn't care if I was overreacting. I just wanted to leave. As I threw my bag in the car, I noticed something in the dirt. Fresh footprints. Barefoot. Big. The same as before. They circled the cabin over and over. I drove out of there as fast as I could. I kept checking the rearview mirror the whole way down the mountain. I don't know what I was expecting to see. When I got home, I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was just a weird weekend, that I was being paranoid. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, hearing those slow, heavy footsteps in my head. And sometimes I wonder, if I ever go back, will they still be walking in circles? I rented the cabin for the same reason anyone rents a cabin, to get away from it all. Work had been draining me, city life was wearing me down, and I was sick of people. I wanted quiet. I wanted trees and fresh air. I wanted to wake up to birds instead of car horns. The place I found wasn't anything special, just a small, single-story cabin near a lake, about 2 hours out of town. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, nothing but woods for miles. That was the point. The owner handed me the keys, told me where to find the extra firewood out back, and left me to it. It was late afternoon when I pulled up. The dirt driveway crunched under my tires as I parked and stepped out. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. It was peaceful, almost too quiet. I walked around the place to check it out. The cabin sat in a small clearing with thick trees crowding the edges. There was a fire pit out back, a narrow porch in the front, and about 50 yards down the slope was the lake, calm and dark, reflecting the sky. It felt isolated. Perfect. I unpacked, made dinner, and sat on the porch with a beer as the sun set. The woods were loud with life, crickets, frogs, the occasional rustle of something moving through the brush. I stayed out there until it got dark, then headed inside. I slept well that first night. Nothing felt off. Nothing felt wrong. It was the second day when I first saw the dog. I'd just come back from the lake, where I spent the morning fishing off the dock. I hadn't caught anything, but I didn't care. I was relaxed, and that was the point. I was walking up the path to the cabin when I noticed something in the woods off to my right. A dog. It was sitting in the shadows just past the tree line, watching me. Not moving, not barking, just staring. It wasn't a small dog. Big, actually. Maybe a shepherd mix. Dark fur, long legs. Something about the way it sat was weird. Too still. Ears forward, head tilted slightly. I stood there for a minute, waiting for it to move. Didn't. I called out. It didn't react. I'm not the kind of person to get spooked by a dog. I figured it was a stray or maybe a farm dog that wandered off. I went inside, made lunch, and tried to forget about it. But when I glanced out the window an hour later, it was still there. Same spot, same position, staring. Something about it was starting to get under my skin. I grabbed a stick, walked down to the edge of the trees, and waved it around. Nothing. I threw it into the woods. The dog didn't even flinch. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe it was sick or injured. Maybe it was just scared. But there was something in its eyes, dark and unblinking, that made my stomach twist. I went back inside and closed the curtains. That night, it got worse. I was sitting on the porch again, watching the stars, when I heard something moving in the woods. Slow footsteps. I shined my flashlight toward the trees, and there it was, the same dog, but this time it was closer. It stood at the edge of the clearing, half in shadow. It wasn't watching me this time. It was watching the cabin. I called out again, but my voice sounded shaky. It didn't move, just stood there, breathing slow and heavy. I could hear it. I went inside and locked the door. I kept telling myself it was just a dog. But when I lay down to sleep that night, I kept hearing noises, soft scratching at the porch, the sound of something walking slow circles around the cabin. I barely slept. The next morning, I checked the porch. There were paw prints, big ones, deep in the mud. They circled the cabin over and over again. I followed them out to the edge of the woods, but they just stopped, like the dog had vanished. I thought about leaving. I should have, but something about it felt ridiculous. It was just a dog. Maybe a weird dog, but still just a dog. I wasn't about to cut my trip short because of that, so I stayed. That evening, I walked down to the lake again, hoping some fresh air would calm me down. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the trees and sky like glass. I sat on the dock for a while, watching the sun dip lower, and then I saw it. On the other side of the lake, just at the edge of the trees, the dog was there again, sitting, staring. But something was different this time. It was sitting upright, too upright. Its back was straight, its head slightly tilted, and its legs folded neatly underneath, almost like it was trying to sit like a person. My chest tightened. I stood up slowly. It stayed perfectly still. I backed away, heart pounding, and walked quickly up the trail to the cabin. I didn't run. I didn't want to. Something told me if I ran, it would follow. That night, I blocked the doors with furniture. I closed all the curtains and sat by the window with a flashlight. Around midnight, I heard it again, the footsteps, slow, heavy, circling the cabin. I shined the light through the window, and my heart nearly stopped. It was standing on the porch, but not like a dog. It was on its hind legs. Its head hung low, shoulders hunched, breath fogging the glass. Its fur was patchy, skin visible in places where it shouldn't have been. Its legs bent awkwardly, trembling slightly as it shifted its weight. And its eyes, they weren't dog eyes. They were dark, too dark, reflecting the light back at me in a way that made my stomach drop. I stayed frozen in that spot for what felt like hours. And then it moved. It dropped back down on all fours and walked slowly off the porch, back into the woods. No rush, no panic, like it had all the time in the world. I left at dawn. I didn't pack. I didn't eat. I just got in my car and drove, heart pounding the entire way back to town. A week later, I checked the cabin listing again. It had been taken down. No explanation, no reviews. It was like it never existed. And sometimes at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear something breathing outside my window. I rented the cabin because I wanted to be alone. Not in a dramatic way. I wasn't running from anything. I just needed space. The kind of space where you can hear yourself breathe, where the loudest thing is the wind in the trees or the crackle of a campfire. I found the place online. It wasn't fancy. One bedroom, a small kitchen, no Wi-Fi. It was tucked way up in the mountains, past a long dirt road where the trees grew thick and close. The kind of road where you don't pass another car for miles. That's what I liked about it. I packed light, just enough food for a few days, a couple of books, and a few beers. The drive was long, but I didn't mind. As soon as I left the city behind, I felt myself relax. The air got cleaner. The sky got bigger. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, it was late afternoon. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. It was quiet, peaceful. I spent the first couple of hours getting settled. I chopped some wood for the fire pit out back, put my food in the fridge, and sat on the porch with a beer, watching the light fade. There was a small lake nearby, maybe half a mile through the trees. I figured I'd check it out in the morning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the woods came alive. Crickets, owls, the rustling of small animals moving through the brush. I liked the sounds. It reminded me how far away I was from everything. I went to bed early that night. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but something felt off. I was lying there, staring at the ceiling, and I realized the woods were quiet, completely silent. No crickets, no wind, just stillness. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the woods behind the cabin. I sat up, heart pounding. Could have been anything, a deer, a bear. But the way it moved, it sounded too deliberate, like it was walking with purpose. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the window. I didn't see anything at first, just the trees, dark and still. I waited, holding my breath, and then I saw it, a figure just beyond the tree line, tall, human-shaped, standing perfectly still. My stomach dropped. I clicked off the flashlight and backed away from the window. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a trick of the light, maybe a tree. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, I walked out to where I saw the figure. The ground was soft with mud from recent rain, and there were footprints, barefoot, large, human. I stared at them for a long time. The thing is, I wasn't scared. Not yet. I was unsettled, sure, but I told myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe a hiker, maybe someone camping nearby. I didn't want to overthink it. I spent the day hiking down to the lake. It was calm, glassy, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I sat by the water for a while, skipping stones, trying to shake the feeling from the night before. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was setting again. That night, it came closer. I was sitting by the fire pit when I heard the footsteps again. This time, they came from the driveway. I turned my flashlight on and pointed it toward the woods. Nothing, just trees. And then I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, musky, like sweat and dirt, the kind of smell that clings to the back of your throat. I scanned the tree line, heart pounding. My brain kept telling me to call out, but something in my gut said not to. I backed into the cabin and locked the door. I sat by the window for hours, lights off, watching. The woods were still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I finally went to bed, I kept the knife I brought for cooking next to me. I told myself I was being paranoid, until I woke up to the sound of breathing. It was right outside the window, slow, deep. I could hear it fogging up the glass. My chest tightened. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there in the dark, listening. And then it tapped on the glass. Not hard, just a light, deliberate tap. I stayed frozen until the sun came up. When I finally worked up the courage to go outside, I found handprints on the window. Big ones, smudged and greasy with long, thin fingers. I packed my stuff. I wanted to leave right then, but the car wouldn't start. Battery was dead. I opened the hood and found deep scratches along the metal, like something had been clawing at it. I was stuck. I spent the day walking up and down the dirt road, hoping someone would pass by. No one did. By the time the sun started to set, I realized I'd have to spend another night. I barricaded the doors with furniture. I closed the curtains. I kept the knife in my hand and sat in the corner, waiting. Came back around midnight. This time, it didn't stay by the windows. It walked around the cabin, slow and heavy, dragging something behind it. I could hear it breathing, slow and wet, like it was struggling. And then it started knocking, not pounding, knocking, like it wanted me to answer. I sat there, heart hammering in my chest, refusing to move, kept knocking for hours, always slow, always steady. And then, just before sunrise, it stopped. When I finally stepped outside, the clearing was empty. The footprints circled the cabin over and over. Deep tracks. I followed them into the woods until I reached the edge of the lake. They stopped at the water. I didn't wait to figure it out. I walked the 6 miles to the nearest ranger station and told them someone was messing with my cabin. I left out the handprints, the knocking, the breathing. They found the cabin torn apart, furniture shattered, door ripped off the hinges. They asked me if I saw anyone. I told them no, but I still dream about it. I still hear the knocking. I wasn't looking for adventure when I rented the cabin. I was looking for peace. A week away from people, from the constant noise of the city. I wanted to sit by the fire, drink coffee in the mornings, maybe go fishing down by the lake. No distractions, no stress. The place I found was perfect. A small, off-the-grid cabin deep in the forests of northern Michigan. No cell service, no neighbors for miles. Just me, the trees, and the water. The drive out was long, but I liked that. The further I got from the highway, the quieter everything became. When I finally pulled up, the sun was just starting to set. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. It was old but sturdy, dark wood, a sloped roof, a big porch that overlooked the trees. Felt calm. I spent the first evening getting settled. I chopped some wood for the fire, cooked dinner, and sat on the porch with a beer, watching the stars come out. I could hear the sounds of the woods, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. Felt peaceful, until it didn't. Started around midnight. I was lying in bed when I heard it. A low, guttural growl. Not loud, but deep enough that I felt it in my chest. I sat up, heart pounding. My first thought was a bear. There were black bears in the area, but they usually avoided humans. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it out the window. Nothing, just trees and darkness. I waited for a few minutes, listening. The woods had gone silent. No crickets, No wind, just stillness. After a while, I convinced myself it was nothing and went back to bed. The next day was normal. I spent the morning down by the lake, fishing. In the afternoon, I hiked a few miles into the woods. I found tracks, big ones, too big for a coyote, almost like a wolf but different, wider, heavier. It bothered me, but I didn't think much of it. I was in the woods. There were animals. No big deal. That night, it happened again. I was sitting by the fire when I heard something moving through the trees. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate. Whatever it was big. I turned off the lights and stood by the window, peering out into the dark. Something was standing at the edge of the tree line. It was hard to see. Just a tall, dark shape, partially hidden by the trees. It wasn't a bear. It was standing on two legs. My breath caught in my throat. I flicked the flashlight on, but by the time the beam hit the trees, it was gone. I barely slept that night. Every time I started to drift off, I heard noises, rustling, movement in the woods, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls of the cabin. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found tracks around the cabin. Huge tracks, deep in the dirt. They circled the porch, stopped at the windows. I crouched down to get a better look. The shape was wrong. It looked like a paw print, but bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. And the claw marks? They were long, too long. That's when I noticed the smell. Musky, pungent, like wet fur and rotting meat. It hung in the air, thick enough to make my stomach turn. I thought about leaving. I really did, but I convinced myself I was overreacting. It had to be a big wolf or a bear with a deformed paw. It was wild country, these things happened. That night, it came closer. I was sitting in the dark, knife in hand, when I heard it breathing. Heavy, raspy breaths coming from the porch. My chest tightened. I could hear its claws dragging slowly across the wood. Not scratching, testing. My hands were shaking. I wanted to look, but I couldn't. I stayed in the corner of the cabin, flashlight off, barely breathing. The breathing continued for what felt like hours. And then, slowly, it stood up. I could hear the floorboards creak under its weight. It was tall enough that I could see its shadow through the window, even with the curtains drawn. And then it howled. Not like a wolf, not like a dog. It was deeper, rougher, a long, guttural roar that echoed through the trees and rattled the windows. I could feel it in my bones. And then it stopped. I sat there until the sun came up. When I finally stepped outside, the porch was torn up. Deep gouges in the wood, claw marks bigger than my hand. I could smell it, that same musky, rotten scent hanging heavy in the air. I packed my things. I wasn't staying another night. As I loaded the car, I heard it again. A low growl coming from the trees. I looked back. It was standing at the edge of the woods. Tall, broad, covered in dark fur. The head was wrong, too big. Ears pointed. Long snout. Its eyes caught the light, reflecting back like an animal's. I didn't wait. I jumped in the car and peeled out, dirt flying up behind me. As I drove down the dirt road, I checked the rearview mirror. It was following me, running on two legs. I hit the gas, heart pounding, hands shaking. By the time I reached the highway, it was gone. I never told anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? A dogman? A werewolf? They'd say I was crazy. But I know what I saw, and I'm never going back. I wasn't planning on spending a week in a remote cabin. It wasn't my kind of thing. I'm not really a nature guy. I prefer places where my phone works, where the nearest gas station isn't a 30-minute drive away. But after a messy breakup and too many sleepless nights, I needed space, somewhere quiet. My friend, Jake, said he knew just the place. It wasn't much. A small, one-bedroom cabin by a lake in the middle of the woods. No Wi-Fi, barely any cell service. Just a bed, a wood stove, and an old generator out back. He called it peaceful. I called it isolated. But I went anyway. The drive out was long and winding, the kind where you stop seeing other cars about halfway through. By the time I arrived, The sun was low in the sky, stretching the shadows long across the dirt road. The cabin sat on a small hill overlooking the lake. It was old, but sturdy. Dark wood, a sagging porch, and a rusted wind chime hanging from the roof. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not just quiet silence. No cars, no voices, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees and the occasional creak of the porch. I liked it at first. I unloaded my bags, started a fire in the wood stove, and sat out on the porch with a beer, watching the sunset. The first night was fine. I slept better than I had in weeks. The second night, not so much. Started around midnight. I was lying in bed when I heard it. A faint rustling sound outside the window. Not close, but not far either. I sat up, heart pounding a little harder than it should have been. Probably just a deer, I told myself. Maybe a raccoon. I tried to ignore it, but the longer I listened, the more it sounded wrong. It wasn't the sound of an animal moving through the woods. It was slow, steady, like footsteps. I got up, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, and shined it out the window. Nothing, just trees and darkness. I stayed awake for another hour, listening. Eventually, I convinced myself I was imagining it and went back to sleep. The next day was cloudy. The lake looked gray and still like glass. I spent most of the afternoon fishing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line, but there was no one there. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed something weird. The back door was open. Not wide open, just a crack. I was sure I had closed it before I left. I checked inside. Nothing was missing. Nothing out of place. I brushed it off as the wind or a faulty latch, but I locked it anyway. That night, the footsteps came back. This time, they were closer. I heard them around 1 a.m., slow and heavy, moving around the cabin. My hands were shaking when I grabbed the flashlight. I peered through the window, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. Nothing. But when I checked the porch in the morning, I found tracks. Boot prints. Big ones. Deep in the dirt. They circled the cabin, stopped at the windows. I stared at them for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just some hunter passing through. But why would someone walk around my cabin in the middle of the night and not knock? I spent the whole day inside. I locked the doors. I closed the curtains. I kept the flashlight and a kitchen knife next to me at all times. The woods didn't feel peaceful anymore. They felt wrong. That night was worse. The footsteps came back around midnight. They were louder this time, heavier. They didn't circle the cabin. They came right up to the porch. I heard the boards creak under the weight. My breath caught in my chest. I turned off the lights and sat in the corner, heart pounding in my ears. The door handle rattled. Once, twice, slow and steady like someone testing the lock. I felt frozen. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the flashlight. I waited, praying it would stop, and then it did. But the footsteps didn't walk away. They stayed. For hours, I sat there listening. I could hear breathing, slow, heavy breathing on the other side of the door. I wanted to move. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I just sat there, heart pounding, until the sun finally started to rise. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, there was no one there, but the tracks were. Deep boot prints on the porch, right in front of the door. I called Jake. No answer. I called the local sheriff's department, but the call kept dropping. I packed my bags and threw them in the car. I wasn't staying another night. As I drove down the dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was a man standing at the edge of the woods. He was tall, broad shoulders. I couldn't see his face. He just stood there watching me. I pressed the gas pedal harder. By the time I reached the highway, I was shaking so bad I had to pull over. I sat on the side of the road for 20 minutes trying to calm down. When I finally got back to town, I went straight to Jake's place. I told him what happened. He just looked at me like I was crazy. He said no one had rented the cabin for years. But I know what I saw. I know someone was out there, and I know they're still watching. I always thought cabins were supposed to be peaceful, a place to disconnect, clear your head. maybe read a book with a cup of coffee. That's why I rented one in the first place, to get away from the city, from work, from people. Just me, a few days in the woods, no distractions. That was the plan. The place I found was about 30 miles outside of town, down an old logging road that barely looked drivable. It was a one-bedroom cabin with a wraparound porch, a wood-burning stove, and just enough modern amenities to keep it comfortable. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, perfect. When I first pulled up, it was exactly how I imagined it. Tall pines surrounded the place, stretching high enough to block out most of the sky. The air smelled like damp earth and wood smoke. There was a small lake just a short walk down the hill. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I brushed it off. After living in the city so long, any place without the constant hum of traffic feels unnatural. I unpacked my bag, started a fire in the stove, and made dinner. The first night passed without incident. I read for a few hours, drank a couple of beers, and went to bed. The next day, I went for a hike. There were no marked trails, so I just wandered through the woods, following the sound of the creek until I found a clearing with an old hunting stand. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. The wood was weathered and cracked. Something about it made me uneasy. I left pretty quickly after that. Back at the cabin, I noticed something odd. The door to the shed behind the cabin was open. I hadn't touched it. I figured maybe the wind blew it open, so I went to close it. The shed was empty, just some rusted tools and a pile of old firewood. But I noticed something weird. The ground was damp, and there were boot prints in the dirt. Fresh ones. That was the first time I felt it. The creeping sensation at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were my own prints from the day before. Maybe I just didn't remember. I closed the shed, locked it, and went back inside. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing noises outside. Not loud ones, just faint rustling sounds, like something moving through the trees. I got up a couple of times to check, shining my flashlight out the windows, but I never saw anything. I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. The next morning, I found more footprints. This time, they were in the dirt right outside the porch. They weren't mine. My boots had thick treads. These prints were flat, smooth, like work boots. They circled the cabin, stopping at the windows. At every window, I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I followed the tracks, but they just disappeared into the woods. I wanted to believe it was a hiker, maybe someone lost, but what kind of person walks around someone's cabin in the middle of the night without knocking? I tried to shake it off. I spent the day fishing down by the lake, but I couldn't focus. Every time the wind moved through the trees, I found myself looking over my shoulder. I decided to leave first thing in the morning. I wasn't about to spend another night out there. That night, I locked all the doors and windows. I barricaded the front door with a chair and kept my flashlight and a kitchen knife next to the bed. I felt ridiculous, but I didn't care. Around midnight, it started again. The noises. First, it was just the rustling. Then, soft footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. My chest felt tight. I held my breath, gripping the knife so hard my knuckles ached. The footsteps moved to the window. I could hear the floorboards creaking under the weight. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then I heard it. The door handle jiggled once, twice, slowly, carefully. I sat there in the dark, heart pounding in my ears, praying that the lock would hold. The footsteps moved again, circling the cabin. I heard them stop at the back door. Another jiggle, then silence. I sat there for hours, waiting for the sun to come up. When it finally did, I grabbed my keys, threw my bag in the car, and left. As I drove down the dirt road, I checked the rearview mirror. There was a man standing at the edge of the woods. He was watching me. I never went back. I told the property owner what happened. He just shrugged and said I probably imagined it. But I know what I saw, and I know I wasn't alone. I didn't go up there looking for trouble. I wasn't running from anything or trying to find myself like the people you read about in books. I just needed a break. Something different for a couple of days. The cabin wasn't even my first choice. It was the only place available last minute. It looked decent enough in the pictures. Small, tucked away in the woods, with a long dirt driveway winding through thick trees. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just quiet. I told myself it would be peaceful. The drive took longer than I expected. The farther I went, the more the roads narrowed until it was just gravel and dirt, lined with trees that pressed in close. No signs, no streetlights, and my phone lost signal about 20 miles back. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was low, a hazy orange bleeding through the trees. The cabin sat in the middle of a small clearing. Dark wood, slanted roof, nothing fancy. It was colder than I thought it would be. I cut the engine and sat there for a second, staring at it. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the silence. Too quiet, the kind that made your ears ring. I shook it off. I was overthinking it. The inside smelled like old wood and dust, a little damp. One main room with a small kitchen on the far end, a fireplace in the corner. There was a short hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. Simple, clean enough. I dropped my bag on the couch, opened the windows to let the musty air out, and sat for a while. No TV, no service, just me and the woods. I tried to settle in. I really did. I read a little, made dinner, had a beer. By the time it got dark, I was sitting by the fireplace, staring at the flames and listening to the crackle of wood. But that feeling I had when I pulled up, it never really went away. It wasn't a sound, not at first, just this awareness, like being watched. I kept glancing at the windows without meaning to. The dark pressed up against the glass, thick and heavy. I told myself it was just my brain messing with me. I wasn't used to being out in the middle of nowhere. I even laughed a little, shook my head. Then I heard it, a thud, soft, distant, from outside. I sat up, heart kicking a little harder. Listened, nothing, just the wind in the trees. I told myself it could have been anything. A branch falling, a deer moving through the brush. But I got up anyway, grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and went to the window. I pointed the beam into the trees. Nothing, just endless trunks fading into the dark. I felt stupid, but when I turned off the light and started to walk away, I heard it again. Closer, another thud, slow, steady, like footsteps. My chest tightened. I waited, breath caught in my throat. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but I've heard animals. This was different, heavy, purposeful. I stayed by the window longer this time, searching the dark, but I didn't see anything. Eventually, I backed away. I locked the door, checked it twice. Then I closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and went to bed. I didn't sleep. Every sound felt sharp. The creak of the wood, the groan of the wind. I told myself I was being paranoid. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding at the slightest noise. Eventually, I must have drifted off. I woke up to a sound I couldn't ignore. 3 loud bangs on the wall. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. I waited, every muscle tight. Nothing. I sat there, listening to the dark. Then another bang. I grabbed the flashlight and crept down the hall. My hand was shaking when I flipped it on. I checked the windows first, still locked. The door locked. I shined the light through the glass, heart thudding so hard it made me dizzy. Nothing. But when I stepped closer, the beam caught something. A dark shape near the tree line. I squinted, heart pounding in my ears. It wasn't moving. I thought it might be a stump. I kept telling myself it was a stump. But I didn't move. Neither did it. Then it shifted just a little, and my blood went cold. I backed away, locking every door, every window, triple-checking them all. I left the lights off. I didn't want to see anything. I sat by the fireplace, barely breathing. Hours passed, maybe longer. The dark stretched on forever. I kept waiting for the sun to come up, but it never felt close enough. And then I heard it, a metallic sound, the handle of the back door. It wasn't loud, slow, quiet, someone testing it. I froze. My throat was dry. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, the fireplace poker, and crept toward the back of the cabin. I wanted to look. I didn't want to look. When I reached the door, I crouched low and peeked out the window. Nothing. The handle stopped moving. I waited there for what felt like an hour, but it never moved again. I backed away, sitting with my back against the wall until the first light of dawn started to creep in through the windows. When the sun finally came up, I went outside, my breath fogged in the cold air. I told myself it was nothing, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But when I reached the back door, my stomach dropped. Footprints, not boots, bare feet. They led from the woods, circled the cabin, and stopped at the back door. Then they turned around and went back into the trees. I packed my things and left. I didn't look back. I drove straight home, heart pounding the entire way. I never found out who or what it was. But the worst part, the thing that still keeps me awake at night, the footprints never came back out of the woods. They started at the tree line and ended at my door.